have been looking forward to, even before Sunday's Gospel, to this time of listening, learning, reflection, unlearning, so that we can learn more. It's very, very important to us. And it happens at a time, as the distinguished chair has indicated, a time when we have a new president of the United States, Joseph Biden, a new vice president, Kamala Harris, and we'll be honored with the Secretary of State and other leaders from this administration. But we're listening at that level and at the grassroots level and at the member level so that we can be transfixed, transformed when we leave in a couple of days and have fresh eyes on the subject that we're out to see, but always true to our values. Build back better for the people, advancing justice, opportunity, and prosperity for every zip code. In that spirit, I yield to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, a distinguished House Democratic leader, Mr. Hoyer.
Let me say it's always a privilege to follow the Right Reverend Conductor of the Democratic House. I have a sort of a mundane role that I've been assigned, and that is to tell you what we're doing and what we're going to do. And we will do it in short 1 minute, 5 minutes. Now, Nancy and I have the ability to talk a little longer than that. But what these issue conferences are about are talking longer, more thoughtfully, more interface, more discussion as opposed to 1 minute statements. And it is to, as Nancy points out, the speaker points out, to look more in depth at the issues we confront. Now, the 117th Congress is facing one of the most daunting scenarios that we've seen. We faced daunting scenarios the last time we were in the majority, in 2009, 2007. But 2008, we had the Great Recession, and we needed to respond. And we did so in a very, very decisive way, and it made a difference, which is why we had one of the great growth patterns starting in 2010 because of that bill that we passed. And much of that had been discussed in previous issue conferences, Mr. Chairman. Now, I had the privilege for 5.5 years of being chairman of the caucus, so I know how important these conferences are, and I know the work that goes into it. And Pete, thank you very much for your leadership. And Catherine, of course, you were involved in these until you became the assistant speaker, so thank you as well. And Jim Clyburn and I have been around for a long time, so we've been to a lot of these.
Well, he held one too, as short as possible.
The House is off to a very good start. We're following a very productive Congress in the 116th for the House of Representatives. I continue to remind people, the fact that it met a slam door in the United States Senate did not mean that what we did wasn't a very productive, and very frankly, we passed 5 bills which kept us out of depression and assisted in confronting COVID-19. This week, we're taking action on H.R. 1, which is on the floor today. We're going to pass the Justice and Policing Act. The chairman talked about systemic racism. That is a very key part of our response. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll pass the PRO Act to make sure that working men and women have the right to organize and bargain collectively so that they can get a fair shake. We're going to look at gun violence, background checks, and Charleston loophole, which is led by Jim Clyburn. 90% of America supports that bill. 90% of that, or about 86%, supported when we sent it to the Senate in the last Congress, and it met a no way response. Important women's issues as well. This month is Women's History Month. We're going to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization. We're also going to deal with immigration, the DREAM Act. About 85% of the Americans support that. So we are doing the people's agenda, and we'll pass that over to the Senate. As we look ahead to the remainder of 2021, we'll have a lot of work to do on behalf of the American people, much of which we will discuss over these next 2 days. As the theme of our issue conference says, we will be focused on building back better. That has a lot of applications, but essentially it means we want to come back from the crisis that we have confronted and come back better. And we will do that. That means over the course of this year, we will be looking at, and the chairman mentioned a number of these issues, rebuilding infrastructure, tackling climate change, strengthening access to affordable health care, expanding economic opportunity, addressing systemic racism. This issues conference will feature important conversations of some of the most pressing issues we face. We'll be hearing from experts in many fields as we have in the past. So I want to thank Chairman Jeffries, Vice Chairman Pete Aguilar, and all of the leadership that has worked so hard to get us to today and get us to tomorrow, get us through the 116th Congress in such a productive way. And I predict the 117th Congress is going to be one of the most productive Congresses in which I have participated. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman. And I will now yield to my dear friend, who apparently is going to give a brief talk, Jim Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. I promise to be a little more brief than yours.
That's not a big thing.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, Speaker Pelosi, Assistant Speaker, my job is going to be rather easy this evening throughout this conference for some reason, and I think I know the reason why. I have decided to add a B word to this Build Back Better. Bold. Boldly. I think it's come to a surprise of a lot of people that President Biden has put forth such a bold plan. But we should not be surprised, because when he received the nomination, he did something that demonstrated his ability to go bold. He named the first woman to be vice president of these United States. Many have been proposed before, but in this instance, he picked not just a woman, but he picked a woman of color. And I know our history well enough to know that a woman of color has been proposed before, but not by a major party. And when he did so, he went beyond what a lot of people would expect. He picked a woman from a historical black college and university. And it demonstrated something about him that I think helps define this administration and define what this caucus is going to be like for the rest of this Congress and on throughout his administration, and that is to see what needs to be done. And irrespective of what may have been the past, irrespective of what may be tradition, to strike out and do it in such a way that we create a climate that is positive for the American people. So tonight, my job is going to be to introduce, I suspect, I hope at this point, to present Kamala Harris to bring an address to this caucus, an address that I think will say exactly what we are all about as a caucus. I'm very fond of this effort because I think it defines diversity in a way that we would like to see it defined, not just African American, but Asian American. Not just a woman, but also the daughter of immigrants. And not just one who has been credentialed, but one who carries with that credential and credit the historical nature of what a lot of us have been all about in this great country. As many of you know, I have been talking for the last 2 years about the challenge we have as Americans, and I have been invoking the writings of Alexis de Tocqueville in doing so. And de Tocqueville, as many of you know, came to this country to study our penal system. But when he got here, he found a certain magic about the country, and he set out to find out what the magic was. He came to the conclusion that America is great, not because it's more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because it has always been able to repair its faults. This administration and this Congress will take some bold steps to repair some significant faults that have erupted in our society, and I think we're going to do it in such a way that the American people will be pleased, and we'll look forward to the future with great aspirations. With that, I'll yield to the distinguished Assistant Speaker, Catherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. Thank you so much. It is so good to be with you. And I want to thank Chairman Jeffries, Vice Chair Aguilar for putting together this issues conference and for all your leadership in keeping our caucus informed and moving forward to meet this moment. And to our outstanding Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, and Whip Clyburn for their commitment to making sure that those issues that families at home talk about around their kitchen table are the priorities on the table here in Congress. So justice, opportunity, and prosperity in every zip code. It is a long title for a big piece of work that we are undertaking to meet this moment of racial, economic, and climate justice. This is the theme of our conference, and it is the driving force behind our work in Congress. This pandemic has exposed so many of the inequities that we knew existed and brought them into stark relief. Women are being pushed out of the workforce. 1 out of 4 women have lost their jobs. Families on the poverty line are slipping further into despair. Black and brown Americans are getting sick and dying at disproportionate rates. This time of great challenge calls for great progress. And this is what we're going to be discussing at the Issues Conference this year. This is our moment, not to return to the status quo, but to boldly build back better. When workers are treated with dignity, when women are treated equitably, and Americans, no matter their background, skin color, or geography, have equal access to opportunity. This is how we center our work in Congress. This is the exciting plans that we have in place to see and help the American people meet this challenge. And we are so grateful to be able to do it with the Biden-Harris administration. So we're looking forward to the next few days and to the session ahead to deliver on our promise to help meet this moment in America. And I am now very proud to introduce Vice Chairman of the caucus, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Assistant Speaker Clark. As the chairman mentioned, and he gave you a rundown of our issues conference, Building Back Better, boldly for the people, justice, opportunity, prosperity in every zip code. Mr. Clyburn doesn't know that we had the banner made already, so now it'll be delayed because of the printing. Our conference is built on the diversity of our caucus. Not only are we a diverse caucus, but we're a united caucus. We showed that with the American Rescue Plan. We're going to build off of that to address and to discuss issues of the economy and healthcare and opportunity and making sure that Americans have a chance in our communities. But we will do that, and the conference was built off of the diversity of the members of our caucus, who were given time to give us ideas and suggestions on programs that will help them. So that's the mindset that we'll take into this issues conference, is building off of our relationships with our colleagues, learning from the diversity of that caucus. And that's what will continue to be our guide throughout the issues conference. Mr. Chairman?
We have to prepare for a timely 3 o'clock start, but we do have an opportunity to take a few questions.
If you could talk about this, Chairman, and also, Madam Speaker, if you would address it as well. I'm just wondering how concerned you are with the White House in their role in the passage of the $15 minimum wage. Do you feel that President Biden has offered a true strategy to making that happen, especially given the ruling by the parliamentarian and how it's unlikely to be a part of the COVID relief package?
Well, I'll just briefly say that the administration put forth a transformative American Rescue Plan. It contained the $15 minimum wage. We believe that that is the right approach, as evidenced by the fact that it was in the legislation that we passed, but the House is the House and the Senate is the Senate. They have a process, they have a parliamentarian, and I'm not going to speak on what their process will yield, other than to say, as I think the Speaker has made clear, we're committed to making sure that we raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. It's the wealthiest country in the history of the world. The notion that anyone is working full-time, trying to raise a family, and making $7.25 should not be acceptable to anyone in the United States of America.
The fight for 15 is one that many of us have been involved in for a few years. And just because this may not survive the Senate right now doesn't mean that that fight is anywhere near over. So we will continue to use whatever legislative options are available to us. It is wildly popular among the American people in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way. Democrats, Republicans, independents, and the rest support raising the minimum wage. I come to this with experience. When Steny and Mr. Clyburn and I raised the minimum wage in 2006. Well, we won in 2006. We passed it in 2007. In the first 100 hours, not days, hours of that new majority that we had. We passed it, $7.25 an hour. It hadn't been raised in 11 years. And now it's been a long time since it has been raised, and we are determined to get the job done for the American people. This pathetic minimum wage, $7.25 all these years later, is really a gift to underwrite those who will not, who are exploiting their workers in many respects. Some people just can't afford, businesses just can't afford to pay the full $15, and we want to help them. But by and large, people are getting food stamps, they're getting Medicaid, they're getting housing assistance and the rest because their employers are not paying a decent wage. So again, for the taxpayer, to save money from all of those expenditures, for the workers so that they can put food on the table when they work full time, and for the businesses, especially the small businesses that need help in meeting that goal, we will be passing minimum wage. And the White House was right out there with it very early. We have no complaint about what they have done.
But there's clearly members of your conference that are very concerned that this particular opportunity is your best opportunity, including many of your progressive members.
That this is our best opportunity?
Right, passing it through reconciliation. That there are
Well, we'll have other reconciliation. We'll have other reconciliation. But let me just say this, because I think this is really important. This bill, as Mr. Aguilar referenced, this bill, this American Rescue Plan, is spectacular. It has so much in it to put vaccinations in the arms of the American people, money in the pockets of our families, children in school, workers in jobs. This is excellent. So let's not be diverted into thinking of what's not in, but let's respect it for what is in, and it is spectacular. Now, we were also present in 2009. The House had a bill that was $1.1 trillion. The Senate cut it back $300 billion. So people say, what lesson did you learn by not going big enough? No, we did go big enough, but it was cut back by about a third, a little more than a third, when it went over to the Senate side in order to get bipartisan support. We value that, but if we had stayed big, we would have had a bigger recovery then. This is a big bill for a bigger recovery. In fact, in light of a pandemic, just what this country needs. It meets the needs of the American people.
I think we have to take
We have some other questions. We're not going to have a conversation.
Thank you, sir. Another question for you and Speaker Pelosi as well. Last night, a member of your caucus called on Governor Cuomo of New York to resign over these allegations of sexual harassment. I'm wondering if you agree with what you think should happen next with the governor given these allegations.
I issued a statement on this issue and made clear that these allegations are very serious against Governor Cuomo, made by serious individuals, and deserve a serious and independent investigation. Now that the Attorney General has taken over the investigation, it will be fully independent and thorough, and I await the results of that investigation.
I associate myself with the gentleman's remarks.
You guys are going into this conference, you're picking up sort of the legislative tempo with adding another work week. How much of that is sort of, this is both for Speaker and for yourself, is basically in response to the ghost of 1994 and 2010, when you lost chambers in the midsection?
Well, I'm just going to yield to the Speaker and Steny on the schedule. But obviously, I think as Jim indicated, these are challenging times, and so we're going to act in a bold fashion. And in order to be able to do that, we have to get to work, not fly off to Florida, but actually get to work for the people, because the level of pain and suffering and death that they are experiencing is extraordinary. And that's the only thing that's driving us.
Let me say, it has nothing to do with 94. It has nothing to do with 2006. It has to do with 2020 and 2021 and the challenges we face from COVID-19, which demand action. Systemic racism demands action. Infrastructure investment demands action. I can go into a lot of the other issues that I mentioned earlier, but Jim Clyburn would say I would speak too long. So it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with what's in front of us and dealing with it so that the people know that we're there fighting for them and their families, their children, their future.
Back row.
Thank you. FBI Director Christopher Wray this morning testified about a number of ongoing investigations still related to January 6th. Wondering specifically if you have heard anything, or if you can give us any sort of insight into the investigation into current members of Congress giving alleged tours. Is that still happening? Are you being kept abreast of that investigation?
Well, as you may be aware, some of our members saw some people here the day before January 6th. It was at a time when we were told not to even bring family members to the Capitol because there would be no tours or taking our families around. But yet these people were there, and they had to be there as the guest of a member or staff of a member's office. So those members who saw those people have conveyed what they saw to law enforcement, and they're looking into that. They feel comfortable that what they conveyed is being addressed. That's all I can say about that.
Thank you guys for both yourselves. I wanted to focus on HR 1 and then the George Floyd Policing Act being brought up again. So I wonder, how is it different from last Congress to this Congress? Because when you go to the Senate, you still need 60 votes. 60 votes still aren't apparently there. And so have Democrats maybe oversold what they could accomplish with control of both chambers?
No, I'll let everybody jump in on this, but I mean, I think we have a House Democratic majority. We have a change in occupancy at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The king of obstruction is no longer in charge in the Senate, It's a very different landscape handed to us by the American people because they want things done, like defending our democracy, H.R. 1, or transforming policing in a way that brings the police and the community together and lifts up the principle of equal protection under the law.
Let me make a comment, because this seems to be a theme of the press and some others, that we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z. But we didn't say we were going to be magicians. We didn't say we could magically make the Senate change or the House change. We have a very close majority. You see that we're doing exactly what we said we're going to do, successfully. I am one who believes that the filibuster is an undemocratic, utilized in my early generation when I started in an interest in public affairs, to undermine the rights of citizens of color in America. I think the filibuster ought to be modified. The founders wanted the Senate to be able to talk and be more thoughtful and sort of, as they said, cool the hot broth into the saucer. But we can't magically make the Republicans be for what the people are for. That was my point. The people are overwhelmingly for the agenda we're passing. And democracy works. And so if the people want those bills to pass, they will either demand that we do away with the filibuster or demand that some Republican senators who refuse to vote for what the people want leave office. But we're going to do everything in our power. I think Chuck Schumer is going to do everything in his power to make sure that the agenda that we are working on and promise the people will in fact be the agenda that we put forward and hopefully pass. None of you here would have predicted 7 Republican votes for conviction. None of us in this room. Yet we got there. So we'll keep talking to our Republican colleagues and keep working with them, both in the House and in the Senate, to get our agenda done, because we believe that is what the people want us to do.
I can't help, oh, excuse me, Mr. Clement, you go, I'll finish.
Well, I think that all of you know I hail from South Carolina. I've studied history all of my life. My dad made me start studying history when I was 8 years old. I remember Harry Truman and Tom Dewey. And I've stayed in close touch with history. I remember 1957. I was a high school graduate. I graduated high school in 1957. A lot of people think that Strom Thurmond filibustered the Civil Rights Act. They think about 1964. It was the 1957 Civil Rights Act, which was nothing but a principle. And the filibuster was used to kill that. And we've seen it used throughout time. Now, I'm calling on the American people, but I'm also calling on my friends in the Senate. I think all of you that have been watching things the last several days, you see that our Republican colleagues are now adhering to political philosophies that are a throwback to the 1940s and 50s. And they are using the filibuster to deny progress basically to low-income people. And if they're going to use the filibuster to deny minimum wage increase, it would be tantamount to using it to deny civil rights. And that, to me, is what we're going to be talking about going forward. We're not going to just give in to these arcade methods of denying progress. This party is not going to do it. And if they want to be categorized that way, we will oblige them. I can tell you, I will not be quiet on this issue. People of color will not be quiet on this issue. We are not going to allow the filibuster that was used to deny me and people who look like me the opportunity to come to this Congress. And that's what they did. And they're not going to deny the opportunity for people to make a decent living above the poverty wage. If that's what they're going to do, they're going to have to live with it because we're going to make sure that we serve it up.
I couldn't resist coming to the podium when you asked about H.R. 1, because as we gather here on the floor of the House, that legislation is being debated as we speak. And that legislation is called the For the People bill, H.R. 1. In the Senate, it's S1. So we're very pleased that they have embraced the spirit of that. This is something that is enormously popular among the American people. The American people want to reduce the role of big, dark, special interest money in politics, which is preventing so many good things from happening. The people want to see an end to voter suppression. The first 300 pages of the bill were written by John Lewis to end voter suppression. The people want to see redistricting done by commission so that voters are choosing their elected officials, not their elected officials choosing their voters. The people want to see a stronger voice for people at the grassroots level, small donors and grassroots people in every way, mobilizing money, messaging in every way. The list goes on and on. The people want to see an end to the foreign influence in our elections. That's one of the most popular features of H.R. 1. So as you've heard me say, perhaps you haven't, but others have here, Lincoln said public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing. Public sentiment is there. Democrats, Republicans, independents. Just declines to state. People not particularly even engaged in the political arena. But this bill is, when the people say they want this, and this bill is for the people. So it's pretty exciting. You asked this question right when that bill was being debated on the floor of the House. Last night we had a call with Eric Holder and John Sarbanes and Zoe Lofgren and Mondaire Jones, our new member, freshman member, with our grassroots organization around the country. And as we were on that call, the rule on the bill was being debated. People were very excited. They could almost see history in motion. This is essential for us to return the people's house. As Steny began, it was your floor speech, I think you began, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's pretty exciting. We're going to make it happen, and we're going to make it happen because the public will insist upon it. And it's going to make all the difference in the world for the people. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before we leave, I'm going to say one thing, Madam Speaker. It occurred to me when I went back to my seat. At noon today, I watched the live streaming of the unveiling of a monument across the street from the Capitol in Columbia, South Carolina, from the State House. On this day, March 2nd, 60 years ago, I was arrested on that corner, along with 191 others. 189 of us were found guilty of wanting to sit down at a lunch counter. All I'm saying to you is, nobody thought that day that one of those little 20-year-olds arrested on that day would be standing here today. We are not going to give up on this. We are going to fight to give people a decent salary, get people a decent housing, get people justice. And if the other side want to spend their time wallowing in the past, we're going to do what's necessary to highlight it.
So what's the statue of?
No, it's a monument. All the names of the 187 West.
That's the main stuff. Carrie is, I think it's Albert.
Okay, so he's doing this thing.
I think. Okay. You might,
'Cause I think I'm supposed to get You take a photo with it.
you're gonna have a section.
Remember, we went down to,
It says, first ever all virtual.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll keep an eye on it.
It's like climate change, you have all these questions.
Yeah.
Matt, I would take the 2 additional designations today as a sign that we will continue to hold Houthi leaders, Nasrallah leaders, to account for their reprehensible conduct, including their continued attacks against Saudi Arabia. I've said this previously, you referenced this, but the 3 Houthi leaders you referenced have been, and they still are, subject to U.S. and UN sanctions. Any property they have subject to U.S. jurisdiction is blocked. That was the case before, it remains the case now. U.S. persons cannot do business with them. That was the case before, that remains the case now. The practical implications for the 3 Houthi leaders you mentioned, the 3 not including the 2 we added today, but today with the 2 now 5. The implications for them are similar. Whether they're designated under our authorities related to Yemen, which we used in the case today, these additional 2, or our authorities related to terrorism. I think the point is that we are not focused on a label. We are focused on taking steps to end the conflict in Yemen through a political track. And importantly, this gets back to
por el Consulado de México para determinar la nacionalidad de estas personas que intervinieron en este accidente. Se habla que hay menores sin dar la cantidad exacta de ellos. Para Univisión El Centro, el Consulado de México está trabajando actualmente para determinar la nacionalidad de las personas que intervinieron en este accidente, además de la cantidad de menores que estaban dentro del vehículo que fue impactado por el camión. Para Univisión en Hollywood, Víctor Adrián Ramírez.
No mandé a hacer mi caso porque va a ser un enemigo ahorita. A ver, ¿te has pintado?
Sí. Nomás aquí abajo.
Es que no veo. Es que no veo por la luz. ¿Sabes que no veo?
No, y así es como más veces te puedes encontrar uno.
Y me das algo despintado, ¿Estás seguro? ¿Estás seguro? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Right, you're gonna be your shot's gonna be hot too.
Hay unos compañeros tuyos.
You have an IFB?
Mientras tanto, el consulado mexicano está trabajando en determinar.
No, I haven't. Can you do that for me? Thank you.
Víctimas. Mientras tanto, el consulado mexicano de Caléxico está determinando. La veo muy oscura. Yo siento que me veo oscura. ¿Qué se me hace? ¿Quién sabe? Y no salgo despintada hoy. Miren la neta, no salgas muy facha, ¿verdad? Es que no me ayuda. No, es que brilla, no veo. No salgas ahí. Ándale. Espérame. Sigo bien dormido. Ok. Thank you, amigo.
¿El consulado está atendiendo?
¿Ahorita? Ahorita voy para allá. Mientras tanto, el consulado mexicano en Caléxico está trabajando en determinar las identidades de estas víctimas. Desde Hotville, California, informó Nacieli Pisano para Telemundo 3.
Send it out to everybody. And I talked to Dave Conwell. He's maybe a half hour out, but I'm 100 yards from seeing this thing. All right. Bye.
Hace por la mañana un trágico accidente.
Marla, I can show you accident investigators are on the scene right here. You can see just how devastating this crash was involving this big rig carrying gravel as well as that older model maroon colored Ford Expedition. Again, this happening at around 6:15 this morning, according to CHP officers on the scene. That Expedition, carrying 25 people on board, was traveling westbound on Norris Street. That is the tiny street which intersects State Route 115 right here. It was traveling westbound. There is a stop sign, but according to CHP officers, it's unclear if that expedition did in fact stop. Now that big rig was traveling away from us, traveling northbound on State Route 115 when the collision happened. Obviously, as you see the positioning right now, that big rig jackknife, and you can see basically T-boning that expedition again, where 25 people were on board. According to CHP officials, at least 6 people were ejected because of the force of the accident. Some were found inside the vehicle as well. In total, 12 people died here on the scene. One died at the hospital. Of course, the 13 others were taken to the hospital as well.
Yeah, I got the record.
And is the driver of the SUV. In total, the ages ranging inside the vehicle, the SUV, range from 16 to 65 years old. In terms of the number of people who passed away here, they range in age from 22 to 55 years old. Now, according to CHP officials here on the scene, obviously this is devastating. They're looking into the investigation right now, and obviously they need to find out if they are U.S. citizens. It's not known yet as of right now, but they are working with the Mexican consulate at this hour. Listen to what they had to say just moments ago. Now, according to CHP officers here on the scene, in terms of the 12 survivors of this crash, a number of them were airlifted to area hospitals, others transported, obviously, immediately after the collision. They say they range in terms of condition from moderate to life-threatening at this point. And when I asked the CHP whether or not he has ever seen so many people inside a vehicle like this one that is meant to hold about 8 passengers max, he says, unfortunately, in this area and even in the LA area, it is common at times to see a number of occupants inside vehicles which should not be taking place. And he says that, of course, there are not enough safety restraints inside that expedition, and it's unclear yet at this point of the investigation whether there are other safety measures deployed like airbags or any other safety feature inside that Ford Expedition could have made things a little better for the occupants of that vehicle. But I just want to leave you with this and show you just how horrific this collision was, taking place right here at the intersection of Norris and State Road 115 here in Hopeville. Obviously, our thoughts and prayers with the families impacted by all of this. And we know that the driver of the big rig was transported to the hospital. He is in moderate condition, according to CHP officials. He gave a brief statement. Of course, they want to hear more from him in terms of how this all played out. It's unclear, yes, Marla, at this point, whether or not speed was a factor in all this. They don't even know if that Ford Expedition stopped at the stop sign right there on Norwich Road. And I can tell you from this vantage point, being on the ground right here, there are skid marks. And those skid marks translating from that big rig. And you can see just the impact and how that big rig jackknifed right there. So again, I ask that because we do see skid marks right here. We do see how just impactful that collision was. So clearly they're going to look into whether or not the rate of speed is a factor in all of this as well. But clearly, again, from people, locals here as well as CHP officials, they see this is a very well-traveled highway, State Road 115. It is closed in this section for right now, obviously, because the investigation is underway. But this is a popular, well-traveled road, and clearly speed could have been a factor.
No.
It's very I got heat waves going through it. I even have a TOC popping up on my 16 That's why I felt alright. And then I've seen people go like over to the vehicles and they just put them back. They say, this car right here is the border. Yeah. I know. Good.
Okay. Yeah, we can do it. Okay. ABC? For Johnny Gregory. Gary!
Partners and allies will abide. As you mentioned, there were sanctions from both sides of the Atlantic today. Our sanctions were significant. Europe's actions were significant. Taken together, this is a sizable penalty for Russia. It is a sizable penalty to which Russia was not subject prior to today. With these actions, the United States in many ways caught up to where Europe had been, because as you said, Europe announced measures last October. With our measures today, we are bringing our actions very closely in line with what our European partners had already spoken to. So when the United States and Europe act in conjunction with one another, when we both take steps to impose these costs, those costs will be noticed in Moscow. And it will also be noticed that the international community is standing up to underscore a norm that chemical weapons cannot ever be used anytime, any place, and by anyone. That is a clear signal that we sought to send today with our closest allies and partners. I would need to refer you to Treasury if there are specific assets. More on Russia? I'll come right to you.
On Nord Stream, you mentioned several times from the podium that you want to work with allies and partners to stop Russia from building the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Of course, Germany is a partner of Russia's in building that pipeline and disagrees with your efforts to stop that pipeline from being built. So the first question is, how do you square your desire to work with allies and partners when the key ally, in this case Germany, fundamentally disagrees with you on whether that pipeline should go ahead? And second, would the U.S. be prepared to sanction German entities such as Nord Stream 2, the company which is undeniably actually building the pipeline? Thanks.
What we have said, and we have made very clear to partners all across Europe, whether that's Ukraine, whether it's Poland, whether it's others, whether it's Germany, that the United States has profound concerns with this pipeline. It is a bad deal. It is not only in the interest of the United States, it also runs contrary to Europe's own stated energy goals. Now, we have engaged in good faith with our German partners. We continue to discuss this with them to make clear where the United States stands. We announced we submitted a report to Congress just a few days ago with additional action against KVT Rus, an entity which we had identified as taking part in sanctionable activity. We are continuing to evaluate the entities involved in this Nord Stream 2 project. I believe it is that we owe a report to Congress every 90 days. The next report will be due to Congress in May, I believe it is. And so in between now and May, if we have additional information that meets the threshold for enacting sanctions, I expect we will be informing Congress of that.
Follow-up, would the U.S. be prepared to sanction German entities like Nord Stream 2? I mean, its involvement in this pipeline is, on its face, pretty obvious.
We are prepared to uphold our legal and policy commitments. I wouldn't want to get ahead of that.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I promised I'd come back to you. Yes.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes.
This is a question for a coworker who are not able to be here on Russia. So there are 8 names that were not sanctioned today by the U.S., but who were requested by Navalny's team in January. Is there a reason why?
Well, U.S. sanctions, we have a certain threshold. We have certain requirements that we must meet in order to sanction a particular individual or entity. So in the first instance, we have to satisfy our own criteria when it comes to enacting sanctions. We took a close look at the available information, the available evidence, drawing on public sources, drawing on sources that are unique to the United States government, and the target set that we sanction today, those are the targets that are consistent with our obligations under the various laws and executive orders to enact sanctions.
Would you say that information that you use to do that is equivalent or roughly the same as the same intelligence information that linked Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi?
I wouldn't want to characterize an intelligence assessment from here. Yes.
Thanks, Ed. Just following on those two questions and the question about the deterrence effect of today's sanctions, is it then the fact that the names of oligarchs that Navalny's foundation had identified as saying would really have the only true way to effectuate change from the regime in Russia? Does this mean that going forward then that those names would be, or that the U.S. has made a determination that those names aren't necessarily subject to American sanctions?
What we announced today was a discrete set of actions. I certainly don't expect that what we announced today was the totality of our efforts to hold Russia to account going forward for its human rights abuses. As I was mentioning before, we have certain thresholds and criteria we have to satisfy under executive orders, under law, in order to enact sanctions. If we determine that it is in our interest to pursue designations against additional targets for human rights violations, whether it's in the case of Mr. Navalny, whether it's in the case of Russia's broader conduct, we'll have to meet those thresholds, and if we do, and if it's in our interest, I expect you'll be hearing more about potential policy responses to that. Yes.
On Iran, what is your next step on Iran? Will you be waiting for them to come to the table? You will put more pressure on them, sanctions? What's next?
Well, I think as I said yesterday, when it comes to Iran, we remain willing to re-engage in meaningful diplomacy to help bring about a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA commitments. We plan to be in close contact with our P5+1 counterparts, certainly our European partners that entail the P5+1. We have made our position quite clear now for some time. We are prepared to meet with Iran to address the way forward on a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA. We also know that a mutual return to compliance can't happen without all sides engaging in constructive diplomacy. For our part, that constructive diplomacy will be carefully coordinated with our European partners and allies. It will be principled, it will be clear-eyed, and it will be in pursuit of one aim, and that is to ensure and to see to it that Iran can never acquire a nuclear weapon and to apply verifiable limits to Iran's nuclear program.
Will there be any meeting with the Europeans or other partners to discuss this? Or?
Well, we're going to coordinate closely with the P3 and with the P5+1 more broadly on the way forward. As we've said, and we spent the first several weeks of the administration doing just this, consulting closely with allies, with partners, with members of Congress. All three of those are very important to us. We're not going to do anything without that close coordination with all three of those elements. If it's in our determination that there is a better way forward to engage in that dialogue with Iran, together with our partners and allies. As I said yesterday, we're not dogmatic about the format. What we are dogmatic about is our ultimate objective, and that is to ensure that Iran can never acquire a nuclear weapon.
Nick, do you agree with the Iranian position that Iran was in compliance with the agreement when the Trump administration, when President Trump left the agreement? And if so, then what is your response to the Iranian position that the U.S. should undo that Trump action and then move forward from there?
My response is precisely what I just said. The United States has put a path forward really in two meaningful ways, one strategic and one tactical. The strategic way is what we have referred to is compliance for compliance. If Iran resumes full compliance with the JCPOA, we will be prepared to do the same. We will meet our commitments under the JCPOA. The tactical proposition we put forward is precisely what we said, a couple weeks ago now, that if the EU were to broker a meeting, we would be willing to attend together with our European partners and allies. Again, we think that resumption of compliance for compliance, can't happen without all sides discussing those details. That's what we put on the table. That's what we remain ready to engage in.
And any movement on the South Korean Iranian assets? Any further conversations or anything to report on whether they might be unfrozen?
I would put that in the context of things we would want to discuss in the context of prospective talks with the Iranians. Again, we're not dogmatic about the format. We are dogmatic about other elements, including our overriding objective in this. Sure.
Israel has blamed Iran for the attack on its ship in the Gulf. Do you have anything on this?
I'm sorry, with its... Oh, the ship in the Gulf. Yes, certainly we're calling for an investigation into that. I would need to refer you to Israeli authorities, though, for their assessment. I just don't have anything to add from here.
Can we move on to Haiti?
Sure.
Given the current political instability in Haiti, would the State Department recommend the Biden administration to continue giving TPS, temporary protected status, to Haitians who have been seeking refuge in the U.S. since the 2010 earthquake? Thank you.
Well, by law, TPS designations are made by the Department of Homeland Security after consultation with the appropriate agencies. So we wouldn't want to comment on any sort of internal deliberations when it comes to TPS.
Can you comment on the political instability there currently? Do you think there will be more asylum seekers?
Well, with the situation broadly, what I would say is that it is the responsibility of Haiti's government to organize elections in 2021 that are free, that are fair, that are credible. We join the international community in calling Haitian stakeholders to come together to find a way forward. What we have said is that the Haitian people deserve the opportunity to elect their leaders and to restore Haiti's democratic institutions. If we have more on TPS, we'll be certain to let you know. Anything else, Francisco? Ethiopia.
Yeah. So we saw the readout of the Secretary's call with the Prime Minister. Can you confirm that the U.S. government has reached its own assessment that there is a campaign of ethnic cleansing ongoing in Tigray, and did the Secretary raise this with the Prime Minister? And also, did he raise the detention of several, at least 4 journalists and translators working for several medias, including AFP, BBC, or Financial Times?
Well, we issued a rather lengthy readout of the Secretary's call this morning. What I would say is that we are gravely concerned by reported atrocities and the overall deteriorating situation in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. We strongly condemn the killings, the forced removals and displacement, the sexual assaults, and other human rights violations and abuses by several parties and multiple organizations now have reported in Tigray. When it comes to the detention of the journalists that you mentioned, we're following those reports closely. We've been in touch with the Ethiopian Broadcasting Authority and other Ethiopian government officials to express our concern and to seek an explanation. These actions appear inconsistent with the Ethiopian government's commitment to permit international media access to Tigray.
Characterize it as a ethnic cleansing campaign.
Look, I have said we're gravely concerned by it. If we have more to add, I will let you know. I heard Burma. Let's be sure to cover that before we close.
Sure. The situation with the ambassador to the United Nations, granted, he presents his credentials to the Secretary General, not to the U.S. government per se, but it's been reported that he is insisting that he is the representative of Burma or Myanmar at the United Nations, not the deputy at the mission, and that apparently he has sent a letter to the Secretary of State indicating that he's standing firm, that he is not going along with the junta in Naypyidaw. What is the building's understanding of the situation in Burma? What is the understanding about the situation with its diplomats in this country? Is the U.S. prepared to provide refuge to any of these people if they may be running afoul of the junta?
Well, Secretary Blinken, UN Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, others in the United States government last Friday, I believe it was, commended the courageous statement made by Permanent Representative Jean Modun. We collectively have commended the bravery shown by the Permanent Representative during her own remarks at the General Assembly moments later. When it comes to John Modun, we understand the Permanent Representative remains in his position. Again, I think generally we continue to stand with the people of Burma. We continue to work with the international community, especially our like-minded allies and partners around the world, to signal very clearly, both in word and in deed, and we've talked about deeds in recent days, that we will stand by the people of Burma. We will continue to oppose the military coup, and we will continue to support the restoration of Burma's democratically elected civilian government going forward.
Has this building had any direct contact with Burmese or Myanmar officials, with their ambassador, for example, to express your deep concern about the political situation in that country?
So, as diplomats, individuals in this building speak with a wide range of people and their representatives wherever they are in the world. In Burma, in particular, it's important that we speak with all of those who seek to restore democracy in the country, including those whom the people of Burma democratically elected to serve as their representatives. I'll take one final question.
Thank you. A couple of days ago, a New York Times article highlighted that the only country in Idlib protecting civilians from being slaughtered by Assad regime and its Russian and Iranian backers is Turkey. So, and by the way, I remember your statement yesterday about Turkish soldiers martyred in Idlib last year. Thank you. So, considering the civilians over there, is there any chance that the Biden administration might be working with Turkey when it comes to Idlib? Thank you.
When it comes to Idlib?
Yes.
Look, what we have said is that we certainly have common interests with our Turkish partners. You mentioned the statement that we put out last night about the anniversary of the horrific loss of Turkish personnel. We have shared interests with Turkey, specifically on when it comes to Syria. We will continue to work with Turkey and to work constructively with Turkey to achieve our common interests when it comes to Syria going forward. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.
I don't know if you'll have an answer. Are you aware of this letter, a reported letter that was written, a joint letter from Fatah and Hamas to NEA, to Hadi Amr about, are you aware of this one? Have you seen it too? And do you have any response to it?
I'm aware of the reports. I don't have anything for you today, though. Thank you very much. No, just a speech direct to camera.
Madam President.
Oh. The senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. A month after Janet Yellen made history as the first woman to serve as Secretary of the Treasury, today we're about to confirm another woman to step into a leading role in our economy, Cecilia Rouse. When she came before the Banking and Housing Committee, Dr. Rouse's knowledge of our economy and her passion for service and her commitment to the people who make this country work were obvious to all of us, to the presiding officer who's on the committee, to Republicans, to Democrats alike. After a year when Black Americans have endured so many painful reminders of the yawning gap between the promise of our founding ideals, it's meaningful that our committee's first nomination committee hearing in the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee considered the nomination of two outstanding Black women who will take leading roles in our economic recovery, Dr. Rouse and my congresswoman in Cleveland, Marcia Fudge. This matters on so many levels. It's important for our future that little girls, including Black and brown girls, see themselves in our leaders, from the vice president to our economic leaders. It matters because of the perspectives and the life experiences these two Black women bring to these jobs. Dr. Rouse has family ties in my state, roots deep into the Mahoning Valley and Youngstown, and a real understanding of the people who make this country work, all people. The Council of Economic Advisors will also play a key role both in helping our economy recover and in building a better economic system out of this pandemic. Dr. Rouse is exactly who we need at the helm. She will help direct our nation's economic policy to put Americans back to work at better jobs with higher wages. Millions of Americans are still out of work. Those job losses have disproportionately fallen on low-wage workers, Black and brown workers, women. 3 million women have been forced out of the paid labor force. At the same time, essential workers are risking their health to go to work, while corporations still refuse, in far too many cases, to pay them a living wage. The minimum wage hasn't been raised in 14 years, year after year. Year after year, Republicans in this Senate and the White House, they profess to care about the working people in the heartland of this country, but they refuse to give them a raise while they funnel tax cuts to CEOs. My first speech, Madam President, my first speech in this body was in January 2007. Sitting in the chair that Senator Sinema now sits in was Illinois freshman Democrat Barack Obama. He was not even running for president at that point. He's since then, since we last raised the minimum wage, he was president 8 years and been out of office for more than 4. That's how long. So while Republicans refused to give raises, they funneled huge tax cuts to CEOs. It's part of the same corporate elite mindset that treats American workers as expendable instead of treating them as essential to our country's success. And we've seen the result. The stock markets go up. Stock market goes up. Corporate profits soar. Executive compensation explodes. And wages stagnate, and the middle class continues to shrink. Building back better. That's what Joe Biden's all about. Building back, that's what Cecilia Rouse is all about. Building back better means taking on that system. It means creating an economy where hard work pays off for everyone, no matter who you are or what kind of work you do, with a growing middle class that everyone can aspire to, everyone has a chance to join. This won't be the first time Dr. Rouse has helped us weather a crisis. She served in the Council of Economic Advisors in 2009 after the George Bush recession, during the Great Recession. Dr. Rouse has spent her career focusing on workers, ensuring that this economy works for everyone. Her expertise, her leadership will guide this administration and Congress as we get to work, not only to recover from this pandemic, but to build a better economy for the future. For too long, American workers haven't had anyone on their side in the White House. That ends now. We saw it on Sunday night with the strongest statement from a president of the United States in support of union organizing that we've seen in my lifetime. We see it in President Biden's choice of Dr. Rouse to help guide our economy and guide this rescue. Cecilia Rouse understands we have the power to change how the economy works. It rewards work instead of rewarding wealth. We create more jobs at middle-class wages. We expand economic security and opportunity for everyone, Madam President, and we create a better system that honors the dignity of all workers. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
We're in a cold call. Madam President,
The senator from Utah,
I ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call.
without objection.
Madam President, the Minor Consent for Vaccinations Amendments Act of 2020 is a measure adopted by the District of Columbia that would allow for children 11 years old and older to consent on their own, without their parents' knowledge or acquiescence or consent, to being vaccinated. They could receive a vaccine contrary to the wishes of their parents or without them even knowing. Now, young children don't necessarily know their own medical histories, their family's medical histories, potential allergies, nor do they have the adult judgment that's sometimes needed to make an informed decision as to consent for a particular medical procedure or treatment or even vaccination, which is exactly why parents make healthcare decisions on behalf of their own children. Parents play the most important role in caring for the health of their children. Moms and dads are at the heart of their children's education and care, and it's crucial that they be able to make decisions about what kind of health care is best for them and about the timing of it. And certainly that they be not only able to make the decision, but also that they be aware of it in the first place. The D.C. legislation that I referenced a moment ago goes so far as to hide children's vaccinations from their own parents, even after it's occurred, in other words. This information is withheld from the parents. It requires doctors, nurses, insurance companies, and even public schools to conceal their children's vaccinations from their parents. It would also fly in the face of parents who may have religious beliefs causing them to object to vaccinations, or who have made the decision for their children to forego, either on a long-term basis or for a particular period of time, certain vaccinations like the HPV vaccine, for example. Furthermore, it would pave the way for allowing children to consent to other types of medical treatment without parental knowledge down the road. Other treatments in other contexts that might have long-lasting, significant impacts on their health. Now, look, as a parent myself, and as someone who, as a parent, believes in vaccinations, I think it's imperative to realize that regardless of how you in particular feel about vaccines, even if, like me, you support the idea of being vaccinated and having your children vaccinated, remember that there are those who don't share those views. And remember that separate and apart from their views, there are some people whose family histories and personal medical experience might reveal some tendency toward a reaction, an idiosyncratic reaction that could be harmful. In some circumstances, the timing of a vaccine can also be important. These are all considerations that a parent ought to be able to make. And in every jurisdiction that respects the independence of parental rights, these ought to be decisions that are made by parents, and certainly ought not be decisions made by children as young as 11 years old without their parents' consent or even their knowledge. And so, in light of these concerns, Madam President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S.J. Res. 7, and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the joint resolution be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President, reserving the right to object.
The senator from Delaware.
Madam President, I respect the views of my colleagues. I respect the views of this colleague especially, and he knows that. We don't always agree on everything, or even maybe most things, but I think it's important that we be able to find ways to disagree without being disagreeable. And I understand that the senior senator from Utah is here today because he disagrees with a particular policy. That is certainly his right. That's his prerogative. And he's welcome to freely register his views, as we all are. For instance, we have heard our friend from Utah defend the principle of limited government and our system of federalism on this floor many times. I've heard him and others, colleagues of ours, argue with passion that the federal government should not be in the business of interfering in state or local matters. And yet, here we are as our Republican colleagues try to tell a local government, once again, what it can and cannot do. My friend from Utah has introduced a resolution that seeks to overturn a law passed by the duly elected council of the District of Columbia. And Madam President, I'm not here to debate the merits of this law. After all, I was not elected by the people living in the District of Columbia. In fact, no one, as far as I know in this room, was elected by the people of the District of Columbia. But the reason that these senators have the ability to try to overturn a law passed by the local D.C. government is because the over 700,000 individuals who call the District of Columbia home continue to be denied full representation in Congress. In fact, denied any representation here in the United States Senate. Under current law, Congress reviews all legislation passed by the D.C. Council before it can become law. The District of Columbia is not allowed to even control its own budget. The mayor of D.C. cannot even deploy the men and women of the National Guard in case of an emergency, a right that every other state executive can utilize. If this were the case for any other state or local government, there would rightfully be an outcry from the citizens of that state or local government. I don't believe that our colleague from Utah would take kindly to me or any of us in this body telling the city council in, say, Salt Lake City, a city with just under 200,000 residents, what laws it could or could not pass. And he'd be right. He'd be right. Luckily, the people of Salt Lake City have a senator who has come to Washington, speaks his mind on the Senate floor, and votes to advance the interest of not just Salt Lake City citizens, but the rest of Utah as well. I think that's really, at its essence, all that the people of Washington, D.C. are looking for. For me, the issue of B.C. statehood is not a Democratic or Republican issue. It's a simple issue of basic fairness. For a nation whose founding mantra, no taxation without representation, inspired the longest-running experiment in democracy, we should all be concerned that today more than 700,000 tax-paying Americans, over two-thirds of whom are people of color, continue to be denied a vote here in this body. Our nation's capital is home to more than just monuments and museums. It is a home to American families who go to work, to Americans who start businesses, to Americans who pay their taxes, to Americans who serve our country in times of war and peace, and to Americans who are still denied representation. Again, it's a home to veterans and service members who have signed up to protect our freedoms, who have risked their lives for our country, and are still denied the ability to have a say in our nation's future. It is home to the hundreds of Capitol police officers who come to work every day at our nation's capital to keep us safe and are still denied a vote in the very institution they protect. For generations, those who call the District of Columbia home have been denied the right to fully participate in our democracy. And that's why we're here today. That's why our Republican colleagues can call this vote to silence the decision made by the local leaders that D.C. residents have voted into office. And that's why they can exercise this federal overreach here today. I said at the beginning of my remarks, Madam President, that my colleagues and I don't always agree on everything, but we do agree on quite a bit. But I strongly agree and want to associate myself with the words of Senator Mike Lee, and I think it was 2018, just a couple of years ago. And he said then, and I quote, "We should allow each unique community to develop unique solutions according to unique local preferences and leave it at that." Let me just repeat that. We should allow each unique community to develop unique solutions according to unique local preferences and leave it at that. I could not agree more. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us who care deeply for our democracy and the rights of all Americans to take up the cause of our fellow citizens in the District of Columbia and use our voices to call out this historic injustice and finally right this wrong. And with that, I stand opposed to Senator Lee's joint resolution, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Is there objection?
I object.
An objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from Utah.
Madam President, I appreciate the thoughtful words of my friend and distinguished colleague, the senator from Delaware. And I am grateful anytime someone is willing to recognize that I've been a consistent champion of federalism and localism, self-rule. He and I agree that those principles are important. My friend from Delaware, being a former governor himself, understands the sovereignty of the states and the need to respect their judgment. This is a different circumstance here than that. This would absolutely be inappropriate for us in any other circumstance for us to tell a state or any political subdivision of any state, a city, town, county, any other subunit of one of our 50 sovereign states, that it would be inappropriate for us to weigh in on a local policy issue like this. It is, in fact, part of our constitutional design that each state and each community within each state needs to be able to express itself and make its own decisions based on its own unique preferences. There is a very significant difference with respect to the District of Columbia. It has its own provision of the Constitution, in fact, its own clause in Article 1, Section 8. Known as the Enclave Clause, this provision is found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and it gives Congress exclusive legislative jurisdiction over what we now call the District of Columbia. It wasn't called that in 1787 when they wrote this. It hadn't yet been designed or created. But it described the area to be created out of land donated by one or more states, no more than 10 miles square, that would serve as the seat of our national government. There was an understanding that the Founding Fathers had that the seat of government ought not be under the control of any single state, but it rather ought to be in a special status. To that end, the Founding Fathers put ultimate legislative jurisdiction in the hands of Congress, not in that district itself, not in the hands of the states that donated the land to create it, but in Congress. Now, the D.C. Home Rule Act, of course, it gives substantial authority to the D.C. City Council and Mayor. As it relates to this legislation, it gives the D.C. government 30 business days after the passage and enrollment of this legislation. And in that 30 business day period, Congress has the ability to disapprove of that legislation, which would stop it from being implemented when it's set to take effect on March 18th. Let's remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about the most basic and fundamental choice that a parent has relative to his or her child. The authority and the discretion to decide when, whether, how, under what circumstances, and at what time certain medical procedures may be performed on the child. You might disagree with the medical judgment of a particular parent at a particular moment, but I'm not aware of any state that would make the decision on a statewide basis to take this choice away from parents. And to say that a child as young as 11 years old could make his or her own choice and not only deprive that child's parents from being able to make that decision, but also being able to deprive that child's parents from ever even learning about it. These things are sometimes not without consequence. Imagine, for example, a circumstance in which the parents are aware of some particular medical condition, medical procedure that the child has recently had. Imagine circumstances in which the child's siblings or the child, him or herself, had previously reacted to a particular vaccination in a particular way. Or imagine a circumstance in which religious considerations come into play. Do we really want to deprive parents of the ability to make that decision? I'm not aware of any state legislature that would make that choice. I certainly hope they wouldn't. But regardless, and even though this would not be our choice, this would not be within our authority if it were not within the District of Columbia and therefore within our plenary legislative jurisdiction under the Enclave Clause to make this decision from Congress. It is our decision here. Because at the end of the day, the D.C. government itself is acting on authority delegated to it by the Congress. So whether you like it or not, whether you like in the abstract the idea of localism, either as embodied in federalism or even more generally than that. You can't escape the fact that under our constitutional system, we are the lawmaker for D.C. No less than any state's legislature is the legislative body for that state. If you choose not to decide here, you still have made a choice. You still have made a choice to approve of that legislative body, stripping away critical protections, critical rights that parents have. We've made that decision not just because it sounds like the right thing to do, but anyone who's ever been a parent understands that it's got to be the parent's choice. The parent has to be in a position of making these decisions, and at least for crying out loud, being made aware of it. This takes away not only their authority and their rights, but even their awareness of what's happened to their child. So yes, I understand the concerns of localism. They simply don't apply here under our constitutional system, under the Constitution itself, the document to which we've all sworn an oath to uphold, protect, and defend. This is not a state decision. To the extent it's a decision for the D.C. government, for the D.C. City Council and Mayor, that's authority that we've delegated to the district. And it's authority that is ultimately ours. We're ultimately answerable to the people, to those who have elected us, to make sure that that's exercised responsibly. So if you don't like the fact that we're doing this, for that matter, if you don't like the policy in this, if you as a state lawmaker wouldn't be comfortable with this policy being adopted in your state, you have not only every right and every authority, but I believe you've got a moral obligation to stand up for this piece of legislation. Do not let this kick in on March 18th. This is wrong. It's not something we have to accept. And it's certainly not something that the Constitution even allows, much less compels. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Senator from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today I rise to speak on a couple of topics. First, I want to take this opportunity to thank really an icon in our state, and that is West Virginia State Senate pro tempore Donna Boley. She's a good friend of mine, but she is now in her 10th term. She is the longest continuously serving member in our state's state Senate. At one point in history, Donna Boley was the only Republican. She was the ranking member on every single committee, and the lead Republican, as she was the only one in the early 90s. But I want to thank her for her service to our state, which began in 1985, and wish her all the best as she presides over today. She's presiding today over the West Virginia State Senate. So, Donna, way to go. Really proud of you. You're a role model for every woman who's watching, and certainly young girls as well. So, Mr. President, I also rise to join my colleagues to discuss the Democrats' so-called COVID-19 relief package. Prior to this past round, Congress had been delivering much-needed relief, as you know, 5 times since the beginning of this pandemic with bipartisan support. And in this last month, my Republican colleagues and I put forth a targeted proposal presented to President Biden in the Oval Office. He invited 10 of us over, and we had a great discussion. It wasn't just a plan, but it was a plan to work together, to be united and move forward on an area that we've had great bipartisan consensus. Let's be clear, we don't disagree on the need for continued relief and resources, but it needs to be done in a targeted way. Throwing money randomly will not fix it, especially when some of these funds that are still being spent that we speak of right now that haven't been spent yet. And taking the opportunity to spend on favorite projects is not the intention of COVID relief package. In December of 2020, that wasn't that long ago, 2 months ago, we passed the most recent recovery effort, which amounted to approximately $900 billion in relief funds. President Biden's relief plan takes none of that into consideration. They don't take into full account the sufficient understanding the impacts of that bill from just 2 months ago have yet to be felt. Instead, it force feeds funds and radical policy ideas into a framework under the guise of COVID relief. Let's just take our schools, for example. Everybody's frustrated because our schools aren't open and our schools are not fully, and our students are falling behind. Congress last year appropriated $68 billion for K-12 schools. But of this amount, only $5 billion of that, $5 billion of the 68 has been spent so far. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, of the almost $129 billion for K-12 schools included in this Biden COVID relief plan, only $6.4 billion of that is planned to be distributed through September of this year. The remaining $122 billion will not go to schools until the fiscal years 2022 through 2028. Now, we're being sold this program because it's an emergency. Well, I don't know how you predict an emergency in the year 2028. This cannot possibly qualify as emergency spending. Here are some of the other areas where funds have yet to be spent. Of the $13 billion provided in our December plan for our agriculture community, only $11.5 billion, $11.5 billion of the $13 billion has yet to be obligated. That's not even spent, that's obligated. Roughly $14 billion in appropriated funding for COVID testing has not yet been obligated, and that is an extremely important part, and that's less than 10% of this plan are things like testing, vaccines, therapeutics. 21 states have actually experienced revenue growth compared to 2019-2020, yet this bill expends $350 billion to states. This money needs to be targeted. The parameters created in this category alone reward states that were more restrictive in their economic decisions and heavily weighted towards highly populated states. That's not my state. That's not my friend here from Montana. That's not his state. And the parameters of this are so loose that I can't imagine what projects will be dreamed up to be spent on. And as of January 19th, none of the $27 billion provided by the Department of Transportation in December, 2 months ago, under the Consolidated Appropriations Act has been obligated. Yet there's more money in there for this as well. Also important to note is that the President plan includes many provisions that really have nothing to do with COVID relief. Nothing. But this is a COVID relief package. So, from an $86 billion bailout of union pensions to $100 million, over $100 million actually, for a subway project in California, to funds provided to advance portions of President Biden's recent climate executive order and environmental justice priorities. These are some of the items in here that have nothing to do with coronavirus relief. These extra wish list items make his plan more expensive and more partisan. To make matters worse, my friends on the other side of the aisle have decided to do this in the most partisan way possible, reconciliation. Using this process risks wasting millions of dollars without the standard procedures that we go through on the appropriations committees and other committees. This bill hasn't even touched a committee over here in the Senate. But it goes without the standard policy guardrails and provisions that when we work together, we ensure that the money is put to its intended use. We're creating slush funds in the name of COVID relief. Bottom line, this will be a fiscally wasteful product. There's good things in here that we all agreed on, that the 10 of us went to the White House to talk about, and many of us have provided in the last 5 bills. Many Americans will be getting checks. And while I agree with this, all of this would be better in a bill that we agreed on and that we negotiated. We are risking a potential economic recovery with continued massive spending. And as I've said time and time again in my 5-minute speech and all over the state of West Virginia, we all agree on continued COVID relief. However, we need to do this in a targeted, fiscally responsible, and working together like we have the last 5 times. Doing so allows us to effectively help individuals, families, and businesses that need help the most, and there are many out there that do, and they need it yesterday, we know that, while also considering what other impacts might be happening as we throw over $1 trillion
last 3 days of not having one. So I take it all. I heard it. So then she said, you can't get vaccine till 3 months after it comes up. So now, yeah, I'm going to ride out 3 months when that's going to be in June. I guess I'm going to ride it. I got a vaccine, my brother had it, frankly. I had a mild cancer. He had it online. I had it ready to go. I just felt like totally caught me off guard. Oh, it's sore, right? It heat sore. Yeah, you were just sore. Your whole body felt like you got plowed on a football player. So you get those sick.
Good afternoon, folks. The Vice President and I have some good news to report. And I'd like to make two key announcements today related to our COVID-19 vaccination effort. As you know, a few days ago, after a rigorous open and objective scientific review process, the Food and Drug Administration issued an emergency use authorization for the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. We should all be encouraged by this news of a third safe and highly effective COVID-19 vaccine. The more people who get vaccinated, the faster we're going to overcome this virus and get back to our loved ones, get our economy back on track, and start to move back to normal. But that's one of my first goals in office when I got in office, was to say that there will be 100 million vaccination shots administered in my first 100 days in office. We've got halfway to that goal in 37 days, and I feel confident we'll make it all the way. As I've said, we have a long way to go, but as I said from the outset, we're going to use every resource of the federal government to make it happen. Among the things I learned when I came in office was that Johnson & Johnson was behind in manufacturing and production. While we had the potential of another highly effective vaccine to accompany the two existing vaccines, it simply wasn't coming fast enough. So my team has been hard at work to accelerate that effort. As I've always said, this is a wartime effort, and every action has been on the table, including putting together breakthrough approaches. And today, we're announcing a major step forward. Two of the largest healthcare and pharmaceutical companies in the world that are usually competitors are working together on the vaccine. Johnson & Johnson and Merck will work together to expand the production of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. This is the type of collaboration between companies we saw in World War II. We also invoked the Defense Production Act to equip two Merck facilities to the standards necessary to safely manufacture the J&J vaccine. And with the urging and assistance of my administration, Johnson & Johnson is also taking additional new actions to safely accelerate vaccine production. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine manufacturing facilities will now begin to operate 24/7. In addition, we'll continue to use the Defense Production Act to expedite critical materials in vaccine production, such as equipment, machinery, and supplies. I've also asked the Department of Defense to provide daily logistical support to strengthen Johnson & Johnson's efforts. And I want to thank Johnson & Johnson and Merck for stepping up and being good corporate citizens during this national crisis. Here's what all this means. We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May. Let me say that again. When we came into office, the prior administration had contracted for not nearly enough vaccine to cover adults in America. We rectified that. About 3 weeks ago, we were able to say that we'll have enough vaccine supply for adults by the end of July. And I'm pleased to announce today, as a consequence of the stepped-up process that I've ordered and just outlined, this country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult in America by the end of May. By the end of May. That's progress, important progress. But it's not enough to have the vaccine supply. We need vaccinators, people to put the shots in people's arms, millions of Americans' arms. To date, we brought back retired doctors and nurses. We deployed more than 1,500 federal medical personnel you usually see during national disasters from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the Commissioned Health Corps at the Department of Health and Human Services and the Defense Department, including the National Guard, with thousands more to come. We're also increasing the places where people can get vaccinated. We've sent millions of vaccines to over 7,000 pharmacies to make it easier for folks to get their COVID-19 vaccine shot like they would their flu shot. The federal government is also working with states to set up hundreds of mass vaccination centers in places like stadiums, community centers, parking lots that vaccinate thousands of people per day. My wife Jill and I just visited one in Houston last week. It's incredible. And with this increased production of 3 safe and effective vaccines, we have an opportunity to help address the urgent national need more quickly and getting our schools back open safely. Right now, an entire generation of young people is on the brink of being set back a year or more in their learning. You can ask millions of parents, they understand. We're already seeing rising mental health concerns due in part to isolation. Educational disparities that have always existed grow wider each day that our schools remain closed and remote learning isn't the same for every student, as you all know. Our educators are doing everything they can to protect and educate our students despite the lack of resources and as districts face budget crises that risk education jobs. Moms and dads are exiting the workforce in astonishing numbers in order to care for and manage the school experience for their children at home, hindering their own opportunities and further undermining the health of our economy. This is a national imperative that we get our kids back into the classroom safely and as soon as possible. As you know, back in December, I set a goal for having a majority of our K The House passed the American Rescue Plan last week, and I hope the Senate will follow as quickly and as well. You know, also the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, issued new guidelines on how to reopen our schools safely. It's a roadmap that will enable schools, if they have the resources they deserve, to reopen safely. I have given those schools a roadmap. I've asked Congress to give them the tools, and today to add one more tool to school reopening, a vaccinated workforce. Let me be clear. We can reopen schools if the right steps are taken, even before employees are vaccinated. But time and again, we've heard from educators and parents that have anxieties about that. So as yet another move to help accelerate the safe reopening of our schools, let's treat in-person learning like an essential service that it is. And that means getting essential workers who provide that service, educators, school staff, child care workers, get them vaccinated immediately. They're essential workers. Over 30 states have already taken the step to prioritize educators for vaccination. And today, I'm using the full authority of the federal government. I'm directing every state to do the same. My challenge to all states, territories, and the District of Columbia is this. We want every educator, school staff member, child care worker to receive at least one shot by the end of the month of March. To help make this happen, starting next week and for the month of March, we'll be using our federal pharmacy program to prioritize the vaccination of pre-K through 12 educators and staff and child care workers. Throughout March, they will be able to sign up for an appointment at a pharmacy near them. Now, I want to be very clear. Not every educator will be able to get their appointment in the first week, but our goal is to do everything we can to help every educator receive a shot this month, the month of March. I want to conclude with this. We're making progress from the mess we inherited. We're moving in the right direction. And today's announcements are a huge step in our effort to beat this pandemic. But I have to be honest with you. This fight is far from over. I told you I'd be straight up with you from the beginning. As I said many times, things may get worse again as new variants spread and as we face setbacks like recent winter storms in the Midwest and South. But our administration will never take this public health threat lightly. Though we celebrate the news of a third vaccine, I urge all Americans, please keep washing your hands, stay socially distanced, wear masks, keep wearing them, get vaccinated when it's your turn. Now's not the time to let up. I've asked the country to wear masks for my first 100 days in office. Now's not the time to let our guard down. People's lives are at stake. We have already, and I carry this in my pocket, lost more, as of today, we've lost more than 511,839 Americans as of today. It's got to stop. We need the United States Senate to follow the House and pass the American Rescue Plan, because despite the optimism, without new resources, our entire effort will be set back. We need the resources of the American Rescue Plan, and we need it urgently. We need them expanding testing, ramp up vaccine distribution, fund FEMA and other federal vaccine efforts, and continue reimbursing states for their efforts. We need the resources to expand genomic sequencing, to stay ahead of emerging variants, find the protective gear, transportation, staffing, and other costs required for school and business to open safely. We need to fund it. The bottom line is we need the American Rescue Plan now. Now. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but we cannot let our guard down now or assure that victory is inevitable. We can't assume that. We must remain vigilant, act fast and aggressively, and look out for one another. That's how we're going to get ahead of this virus, get our economy going again, and get back to our loved ones. So thank you, and please, please, it's not over yet. Great news, but stay vigilant. May God bless you, and may God protect our troops. Thank you all very, very much.
Mr. President, based on the news that you announced, when do you think things will get back to normal? When do you think things will get back to normal?
When do I think things will get back to normal? I've been cautioned not to give an answer to that because we don't know for sure. But my hope is by this time next year, we're going to be back to normal, and before that, my hope. But again, it depends upon if people continue to be smart and understand that we still can have significant losses. There's a lot we have to do yet. So thank you.
Did you receive a briefing about the border today? Did you receive a briefing about the border today?
Yes, I did.
What did you learn?
A lot.
Is there a crisis at the border, sir?
No, we'll be able to handle